We're continuing our study of the Jesus Christ himself here in our Wonderful Day in the Lord broadcast. If we think about it just for even a few moments, can we think of anything that is more glorious and wonderful to think about than Jesus Christ? What a wonderful thing. We know as much about Jesus Christ as the Scriptures tell us. Beyond that is conjecture or perhaps even dangerous. If we start imagining things about God or Christ that are not true, we can really go astray in a hurry. So we're so grateful the Lord gave us so much information about Jesus. There are some pictures in the Old Testament, some description. We'll look at a few of those as we go through. But most of what we know about Jesus Christ is found in the New Testament, and the most of that is found in the Gospels, which is the narrative sections that tell us who Jesus is. It gives us 4 different Gospels that enable us to get a good handle on Jesus. If Jesus is representing God to us, then what a wonderful thing it is to have this picture, this narrative of Jesus found there. So let's talk about who Jesus is by looking at some of his names or his titles. And the first one, we're back to John chapter 1. It's hard to get out of John chapter 1 when it comes to Jesus, at least early on. And we have already touched on verse 1. It says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." So we find, first of all, that he is the Logos. That's the Greek word for word here. Only in John's writings is Jesus called the Word, or the Logos. So what did John have in mind? Now, we know this, that John is the last of the writers of the Gospels. And he's the last to write the New Testament books. So the Gospel of John is the last one to be written of the Gospels. And then his 3 epistles are the last of the epistles. And then the book of Revelation, penned by John as well, is the last book of the Bible. So John is coming later than most of the others. Many of them believe that he wrote much of what he wrote even in 90 AD, which could be 30 years later than what Paul wrote. So as he's writing, things are happening in the world of his day that needed to be addressed. And so when he comes to this word, this Logos, I've always believed as I look at this that John is looking at 2 different worlds. He's looking at the Jewish world in which many of his readers and audience are coming from. And he's looking at the Gentile world, which by now have begun to dominate the church. It started out as a Jewish entity. The church was mostly Jewish, but as time spread, as Paul went forth and Peter went forth and so forth, the Gentiles by the boatload got saved, until eventually the church was dominated by Gentiles. So by the time John probably writes this gospel, there are many, many Gentiles in the church perhaps to dominate. And the Gentiles don't come from the Jewish perspective, they come from a more pagan perspective. So the word Logos to the Jews would have meant God's communication, his word to us. And I do think that's definitely part of what he's saying here. But also the word Logos to the pagan Gentiles, the Greeks and the Romans, meant the controlling entity of the universe. The pagan world was replete with gods and goddesses and myths of all kinds. But they believed that over all that, especially the Greeks, they believed over all of the deities, all the gods, all the goddesses, was a power or a force that controlled and dominated even them. And that was the Logos. And so when John adopts this word Logos here, I think he's looking at the Jewish world and saying, here's God's communication to us in perfect form, and to the Gentile world and saying, look, the controlling entity of the whole universe, the power behind everything, is the Logos. And who is the Logos? None other than Jesus Christ. When he drops down to verse 14, he makes that clear. He says, the Word became flesh. That's the incarnation. And dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, glory as of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth. And in verse 18, no one has seen God at any time. The only begotten God, that's Jesus, who is in the bosom of the Father, he has explained him. Why did Jesus Christ come to the earth? Why did he incarnate? He came to communicate to us what God is like. The Gentiles thought of a power in the universe they didn't understand. Jesus Christ explains that power. The Jews knew that God was God, but they didn't understand Christ as being the Son of God. Now they do. And Christ came so that He might explain God or exegete God, so that we see in the most perfect form that He ever gave us what God is actually like. And so that is who He is. And so one of His great titles is the Logos, the Word of God.